because I got to keep Bambi and Thumper out of my farm, right? But then there's my neighbors. They're a bunch of slacker, lazy bastards. They haven't planted their own field and they're really hungry now, and so they're coming onto my field and stealing my food. So I need to smash them in the head with a club and try and push them away from my farm field. And so we've just invented warfare. We've just invented private property. To make things worse, we're now living in these densely populated areas, or at least more densely populated areas. So if a disease breaks out, we're more likely to transmit it to each other, whereas before, if a disease broke out in a gathering and hunting band, they would just die before they had a chance to pass it on because they were so isolated from each other. So we're now having rampant diseases, no teeth, our diet sucks, our food tastes like crap, and we're doing warfare. But I thought, like probably most people, that's the key ingredient to starting civilization. Next thing you know, we have government and organized religion, and boom. We now think, based on a finding in 2007, that something else may be going on. The finding was in Syria, and as you know, 4 years later, there was this inconvenient little civil war. We found archaeological sites in Syria where religious monuments were built that predated agriculture by as much as maybe 2,000 years. So not predated agriculture by 20 years or 100 years or 200 years, but possibly as much as 2,000 years, 1 to 2,000 years. It's not close, right? It might as well be a million years away, actually, at that point. It means that monumental structures weren't dependent on agriculture as we had thought, that bringing people together into densely populated areas wasn't apparently as dependent on agriculture as we thought. We've since found some archaeological sites that are similar in Turkey, and we've been sort of going through the ones in Turkey, but we can't do any of the archaeology on Syria. In other words, I'm eager for the Syrian civil war to end, not just so that Syrians can stop murdering each other, but so we can send archaeologists to go in there and dig these sites up, because I have a feeling that they're going to reveal something remarkable. One of the interesting things is we found bones, and we can test bones to see what your diet was. You really are literally what you eat. And the bones confirm that these were not farmers. They were gatherer and hunters. They really were on this pre-farm diet. So it's not just, we're not just relying on carbon dating to confirm this. In any case, I just want you to know that where we peg the start of civilization and how we define what it is should be something that we question. I certainly think we need to throw out, and we need to throw it out as fast as we can, the advent of writing that's absurdity. Archaeology makes that clear, just because archaeology has told us all these other remarkable stories. Whether we peg it to government like my original assumptions told us to do, or we peg it to the advent of organized religion, as these sites in Turkey and Syria are clearly indicating happened 14,000 years ago. I don't know. This notion of east-west. So I want to get back to that, because I find it really strange. So think about what your average history class, whether it was in high school or maybe it was Western Civ 1 or Western Civ 2 in college. Let's do Western Civ 1. So you go in, and your textbook and your professor, let's do a 16-week, let's make it a college class. It's a 16-week class. You're going to meet 32 times. And in the process, you're going to start off with Mesopotamia, right? Every textbook starts off with Mesopotamia. Why? Because 5,100 years ago, they started writing. Okay. And your professor probably spends 1 day on Mesopotamia, maybe 2. And next thing you know, you're doing Egypt. And you spend 1, maybe 2 days on Egypt. The next thing you know, you're doing the Greeks, and you're spending 5 weeks. We have skyscrapers, and it's done. We're on the moon. It's great. It's great. Here's where I get lost. So, and you've probably already figured this out about me by now. Wouldn't you want to talk about your starting point a little bit more? I mean, when you start something, isn't the starting moment kind of one of the most important moments? Because doesn't it frame every single thing you will do afterwards? That 1 or 2 class periods on Mesopotamia and the 1 or 2 class periods on Egypt doesn't quite seem like it's enough. Because listen what the textbook and the professor are admitting. Egypt and Mesopotamia founded Western civilization. Even if you say, no, it happened in Syria, right? Part of Syria is in Mesopotamia, and the rest of Syria is immediately adjacent to Mesopotamia. So clearly, the foundational moment for Western civilization has at least something to do with what is today Iraq and Syria. On top of it all, we know that around 11,700 years ago, Iraq did agriculture before anybody else. So even if you buy the thing that I'm asking you to question, that agriculture was a key component to starting civilization, it's still Iraq. But then if you do what I do, and you go, no, government, although I'm questioning this, then it's Egypt, and then Iraq, because they did it next anyway. In other words, I completely agree with starting with Mesopotamia and Egypt. Where I'm lost is, why are you walking away from the founders of your civilization so quickly? Especially when you consider the breadth and depth of Egyptian history. The oldest continuous lived-in city on Earth is the city of Luxor. It was founded 3,200 BC. It is 5,200 years old. And it's been continuously lived in that entire 5,200 years. I mean, that in and of itself is shockingly remarkable, right? When you think about it this way, Alexander the Great went to Egypt 2,300 years ago. So when he went to Egypt, right, Luxor was already 2,900 years old. Luxor was already almost 3,000 years old. Like, just the depth and breadth to Egyptian history. How can you cover anything worth mentioning in 2 or 3 classroom periods? Let alone the fact that, there was the Great Library, and that was really late in Egyptian history. If Egypt is 6,500 years, as I'm asserting with the advent of government, then by the time they did the Great Library, which was just 2,300 years ago, they were already 4,200 years old. Compared to our 240 years. Dude, make it 410 and start us with Jamestown. It's still a joke. But there's another really weird big problem here. So there is this other civilization that just completely got left out. I mean, it gets talked about a little bit when you were doing the Greeks, and it gets talked about a little bit when you're doing the Romans, but just barely. It's almost like, oh, geez, okay, I guess we have to talk about it. The Persians. And then when they get portrayed in our movies, right, the leader of the Persians is this tall, gay, black man. Right, because everybody hates tall men, gay men, and black men, so they made him the most evil imaginable person the world has ever seen, a tall, gay, black man. Which is ironic, since he's fighting the Greeks. The men who not only wore skirts, but they wore them so that they could have quick access after battle. Right? Forget the Greeks. Julius Caesar, the Roman. His name wasn't Julius Caesar, by the way. It was Gaius Julius Caesar, but it's okay. You don't need to know that. What did his men say of him? They said, Julius Caesar is a husband to all women and a wife to all men. Anyway, back to Persia. So first of all, Persia is on the Iranian plateau. The Iranian plateau was named because That's where the Aryans ended up, as in the Aryans, as in the thing Hitler was obsessed with, as in, right, what we think of as the quintessential human. You go, well, I don't. Yeah, whatever. It's not true, you know it. Right? I mean, our society thinks that the average European male, to be precise, is the neutral person in the universe, the perfect person, the person that we look to, the person, so much so that they have to include one of these in every movie, right? So there's the 7 Years in Tibet. Like, they wanted to tell a story about Tibet, and they're like, oh, God, people won't watch it unless we include a Nazi. Here, let's put this German in Tibet. He really was in Tibet, but no one cared. But then they made the whole movie revolve around Brad Pitt so that you could be lured into watching a movie about Tibet. Right? Last Samurai. They had to stick Tom Cruise in there somewhere so you would go watch the movie about the Japanese being amazing. They didn't need a white guy to make that happen. But of course, if the white guy isn't there, it's so bad, this thing that I'm talking about, that they made a movie about the British stealing the Enigma machine. The way they got it was they captured a German sub. It didn't sink, they caught the damn thing. And when they got on board, they had an Enigma machine. Just for the record, it's not the British or the Americans who cracked the Enigma code during World War II. It was the Poles who did it. And right before Poland was conquered, they sent all their data to the British because they were, you know, it was like their last. All right, we're going to get conquered, but we're not going to go down without hurting you first. And the British had this data that the Poles had been compiling, and they just needed a machine to have that last piece to crack the code. They needed a machine. And so the British go and they capture the sub. The Hollywood movie, it's an American sub, it's an American crew that captures the German sub. Really? You couldn't have made, they speak English, they're white. You couldn't have made them English? How alien are the English to us that we couldn't make a movie that was at least remotely somewhat similar to history? So back to the Persians. The Persians, those Aryans whom you hate so much that you cast them as tall, gay black men. The Persians did really amazing things. Kurosh, Cyrus the Great, when the Romans transliterated K, the Greek letter kappa, which looks just like a K, they transliterated it as a C because in Latin, C is pronounced ka, always. They never, in Latin, you don't ever pronounce the C as a sa. It's always ka. That's why it's Kaiser, not Caesar. You just, that and it's C-A-E. It's not C-E-A. How did we get Caesar out of that? Anyway, and then A-E was probably pronounced I. That's why it's Kaiser. So, Cyrus the Great is this Persian who 2,600 years ago comes up with this brilliant idea. Long story short, he wants to create a massive multicultural empire. And he almost does it before he dies. I mean, he does do it, but it doesn't reach its high water mark. It'll get bigger after he dies. By the time they're done, they had actually conquered the Indus River Valley. And they had named one of the satrapies India after the Indus River, which is today in Pakistan, just to make things confusing. They had conquered Central Asia, like almost all of it. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, that whole zone, they conquered it. All of Persia, all of Afghanistan. They conquered Egypt, the entire Middle East, except for the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula, Turkey, and they had even conquered huge swaths of what is today Greece and even a little bit of Bulgaria. They put this empire together, and then, instead of subjugating everybody and taking slaves and taking tribute and plundering people's cities, they went, welcome. Welcome to the Persian Empire. You're now members, which means you get the benefits of the empire. And instead of saying, okay, we want you to all learn Persian, they said, keep speaking whatever language you speak. That's great. Instead of saying, okay, we all want you to have our religion, they were Zoroastrian, and you're going to worship our God, Ahura Mazda, before it became a car company. Instead of doing that, they said, not only do you have freedom of religion, not only will we let you worship your own gods and have your own religion, we will actually fund your temples. We will actually do the maintenance on your temples. And if your temples are in terrible disrepair, we'll help you rebuild them. This becomes a biblical story at this point, right? The Jews show up and they go, hey, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, when they conquered Palestine and took us into slavery, they blew up our Temple of Solomon. Were you serious that you'll rebuild our stuff? And the Persians go, absolutely. And so the Jews show them the plans. They go, here, this is what the Babylonians destroyed. And the Persians are like, what the hell? That's a man-made mountain. How did they destroy that? They really hated us. They stuck in an upgrade. And the Persians went, well, we have to rebuild it, I guess. But they realized the only people on earth who had the ability to build something like that were the Egyptians. So they went and grabbed Egyptian engineers, brought them to Palestine, and with Persian gold, built the second Temple of Solomon that the Romans eventually destroyed to punish the Jews. Right? This is that empire, that Persian empire. It was an empire of tolerance. It was an empire that celebrated the different cultures. If you get a chance to go to Iran, it's very hard to do because it's hard to get a visa. Go to Persepolis. In Persian, they call it Takht-e-Jamshid. There is this staircase called the Apadana. I'm probably totally mispronouncing it. Staircase. Go and look at it. What you will see is you will see men dressed in their native dress, carrying gifts. They're carrying tribute to the Emperor Darius. But the men don't look like they're in despair and beaten down. The men are in their native dress, and the reason that the Persians did this is they wanted to show the diversity. At one point, there's a group of men who are holding hands. They're walking in a chain holding hands. Because the Persians wanted the symbolism of, we're in this together. Armenians and Jews and Arabs and Babylonians and Assyrians and Egyptians and Greeks and Tajiks and Afghans and Indians. It's one empire, but it's many people. And the way they codified all this, a Bill of Rights. The world's first ever Bill of Rights. It not only guaranteed freedom of religion, but it guaranteed you no slavery. They banned slavery, they outlawed it. They said, we won't do this. We won't reduce whole populations to subservience. If you go to New York City, go to the UN building. As you're walking in the front door, above the door in 6 languages is a text. English is one of them, so you can read it. That text is that first ever Bill of Rights from 26 centuries ago. It's written also in Persian, by the way, which is only fitting since the Persians made it. My point in bringing this up is this is the idea that some of you anyway, have embraced of multiculturalism. This is the idea that some of you have embraced with the notion the United States is a melting pot. This is the idea that some of you have embraced that you should have the right to have your own religion. And it's from Persia. It spreads from Persia to the Greeks. When the Greeks execute Socrates, one of the things that they nailed him for, one of the reasons he got the death penalty, was defaming the gods. In other words, the Athenian democracy didn't have freedom of religion like the Persian Empire did when they were executing Socrates for defaming the gods. The other one was corrupting the youth by giving them bad ideas and making them question the civilization they lived in because he thought it was deeply flawed. So how did Persia get left out of this story? Now, Persia does collapse, but then it's resurrected. It doesn't just randomly collapse. It's destroyed by a guy named Alexander the Great. But then it gets resurrected. And that resurrection is so utterly complete that you can go to Iran today and find Persians named Iskandar, Alexander. Because they don't, even though he destroys their empire Persian Empire sub 1, they replace it with 3 more. There will be the Seleucids, and after that the Parthians, and after that the Sasanians. And so even though they have to replace their empire, they don't see him as a villain. They see him as an integral part of their history, somebody to be celebrated, somebody extraordinary. Because they saw this as this merger of civilizations, that they had become a little bit Greek in the process of Alexander conquering them, and the Greeks had become a little bit Persian in that process as well. That it was a mutual exchange of ideas and information. We don't look at it that way. We see it as this evil, dark, gross empire being destroyed by our hero, Alexander, a megalomaniac who believed that Zeus was his dad, which is why he took 15,000 men on a violent rampage through a stable empire and destroyed it and burnt their capital, destroying their library in the process, wiping out history that we'll never be able to read because it's gone. Because he was a narcissist. But somehow he's the good guy and they're the bad guys, even though they're clearly the victims here. But there's something even stranger in all of this. So in the aftermath of Alexander, the Ptolemies are going to build a great library and then maintain it. Well, the great library becomes the massive repository for the world's knowledge. In a way, it was our first ever attempt at an internet. Right? One location you could go to and find everything there was that was known. And they got to 1 million books. It was an extraordinary experiment. And it lasted a long time. The library was founded right around 290 and it was just BC, and it was destroyed in 391 AD. So we're talking 680 years, which is almost 7 centuries. And at that place, they made one incredible discovery after the other. The world's first ever static rocket. The world's first ever mechanical play. You turned it on, it was steam powered. It would do scenes and sounds. Right? They invented geometry at the Great Library. Euclid did it. And you can go on and on. They figured out the size of the Earth. Not only did they know it was a sphere, but they knew its size. They figured out that the Earth wobbled. It does one full wobble every 26,000 years. Think about that. In 1 year, you're only measuring 1/26,000th of the wobble. They had done such amazingly precise star measurements that they, after a few years of observation, noticed this imperceptible wobble. It's called a parallax. It goes on and on. Well, our library was in Egypt. That was literally the heart of Western civilization and the brain. And somehow, we don't think of Egypt as being in the West, even though Egypt is, we give it credit as being one of the 2 founding civilizations. It was the Egyptians and the Mesopotamians. But somehow Egypt gets left out. Now, it is true the Great Library gets burnt, which means we're going to have to start over again. But the place we're starting over again is actually in the Persian Empire. Because just before the Great Library gets burnt in Alexandria, the Persians had decided they wanted a library of their own. And the people who escaped from the Roman Empire with their books, trying to get away from Theodosius, the Roman emperor who decides to purge Roman Empire of all its non-Christians, including its non-Christian ideas. He's, by the way, the guy who ended the Olympics. He went, no, we won't do that anymore, it's pagan. Like everything had to go. All the knowledge, all the traditions. If you look at the texts of the time period of Theodosius, Emperor Theodosius, he treated the pre-Christian Romans as if they were aliens, not as if he was the descendant of them. Right? They tried to destroy all the pre-Christian statues. So they would find a statue to Emperor Marcus Aurelius, they'd melt it. They were purging the earth of everything pre-Christian. They wanted to erase it. Well, that pre-Christian stuff included Aristotle and Plato and Aristophanes and Sophocles. It included Heron and Euclid and Aristosthenes. And they were doing this at the same time the Persians were greedily gobbling that stuff up and adding it to their collection of knowledge and starting a new library at Gondi Shapur. But then that brings us to the next really weird moment in this East-West divide, this Western civilization thing, where we've left it out. And I didn't discover it until I was probably about 18 or 19. I'll just admit I was already obsessed with history. I realized something, and that was I didn't know anything about the Middle East during the medieval period. I knew a little bit about ancient Egypt. I knew a little bit about Mesopotamia. I remember Hammurabi, right, and his crazy code. Everybody's blind and toothless. The guy was sick. So that was what we focused on, of course. Not Cyrus the Great and his, hey, worship the gods you want. I will support that monetarily. No, we focused on Hammurabi. I knew a lot about Rome. I was obsessed as a kid. And I knew a little bit about the Greeks. I didn't know anything about the Persians. Right? Like, they hadn't yet made the movie, so I didn't know they were tall, gay, and black. I knew a little bit about the Vikings, right? But I didn't know anything about medieval Middle East. And I found this book. I went to the library, and I found this book. It was written by Sir John Bagot Glubb Basha. His name is John Glubb. But you know how sometimes people get a little carried away with their names and start adding stuff to it. So Sir John Bagot Glubb Basha. Basha is a title. Obviously, so is Sir. And he had been in the British military, and when the British pulled out of what was then called Transjordan Palestine, but it got renamed Transjordan, and then it got renamed just Jordan. So today it's the Kingdom of Jordan. When the British pulled out of Jordan, he stayed behind. He went to the Jordanians and went, I don't ever want to leave. I was born British, but in my heart I'm an Arab. Let me stay. And they went, yeah, we need skilled officers. And he became a general in the Transjordanian army. And he stayed behind. And he wrote a series of books. And I got a hold of one of these books and I read it and I couldn't believe the hole in my knowledge base. And I went and found another one of his books and I read it. And I started trying to fill this hole. And the hole was the Arabs. The Arabs, it turns out, had built this massive empire overnight that embraced knowledge and was shockingly tolerant. It was similar to the Persian Empire. In fact, it's really remarkable because if you look at the area that the Arabs conquered, they conquered everything from Spain to Pakistan when they built their empire. It was like the Persian Empire plus most of the Roman Empire combined. So it was bigger than any empire that had preceded it. One of the things that's remarkable about it was the majority of the world's Christian population was in that empire. 60% of all of Christendom was in that Muslim-ruled Arab empire. In its first couple of centuries, there were almost no Muslims in the Arab Empire. They were the rulers, but they were like 5% of the population because they didn't force anybody to convert. So not only did they end up with the majority of the Christian population of Earth, but they were majority Christian also. And it was okay. They were tolerated. That Christian population was tolerated and integrated into their society because they were a tolerant empire. Now, what's remarkable about this is they began to advance human knowledge. The lens, invented by Ibn al-Haytham, the same guy who invented the camera. He's also the guy who realized that light traveled at a finite speed, in waves and could be broken down into its constituent colors, and that all objects in the universe exert gravity on each other. He also invented the world's first ever scientific method. He stated Newton's first law of motion 600 years before Newton, dabbled in calculus 600 years before Leibniz and Newton, stated Kepler's first law of planetary motion 500 years before Kepler. There was Ibn Sina, the guy who invented modern medicine. He's also the guy who came up with the idea of singularities. He effectively postulated Big Bang. He's the guy who kicked off phenomenology that Husserl and Heidegger will later on take on and develop further. Right? There was this huge blossoming of scientific and philosophical knowledge in that time period. Ibn Khaldun, the father of political science, the father of history, the father of sociology. The Arabs invented literary studies where you would look at literary sources for the purposes of trying to figure out what the truth was, for the purpose of trying to understand. In other words, the English departments all owe their existence to these guys. How can that much be carved out of your historical knowledge when all of it is Western? That's the key to this. The knowledge that the Arabs were building off of was Western. The knowledge that they made was Western. And the answer is that what we did was we intentionally created this East-West paradigm to divorce the Arabs and the Persians from the rest of the West. That this was an intentional thing. Right? Al-Khwarizmi invented algebra, algorithms, zero, Arabic numerals. You can't jettison these guys. They're too much of our foundational understanding of the universe. Right? What would we be without algebra and algorithms to mine your internet activity and then launch really nice ads directly aimed at you, customized for you, to get you to buy stuff you don't need? How many times have you opened an app or something and saw the ad that was exactly about what you were just talking to somebody? It's creepy. Here's what happened, in a nutshell. Europe had gone through a phase of massive intolerance under the leadership of the Romans, especially epitomized by Emperor Theodosius I. Theodosius I declared that the Roman Empire was a Christian-only empire. In other words, he was a fundamentalist Christian who decided to jettison any concept of tolerance that existed. In the process, he set into motion this idea that it was Christianity versus the rest of the world. Now, the Romans had already had enormous trouble with the Jewish population, right? And they ultimately burnt or destroyed the Second Temple of Solomon in the process. But for that matter, the Romans had had trouble with the Christian population. We all know about Romans feeding Christians to the lions. But Rome is now converted to Christianity. And now they've taken all that intolerance that they had been directing towards Christianity, and now they're directing it towards everybody else. Islam is born shortly afterwards. Emperor Theodosius, right, is the late 300s, early 400s, and then Islam is born in the early 600s. So there's about 2 centuries later, Islam comes into being. And so all of that religious intolerance that had been brewing in the Roman Empire gets focused on Muslims at a time when the Muslims are conquering whole swaths of the Roman Empire. And so the Roman Empire sees itself as the victim of these people. But here's the twist. That period of time that I just referred to, where I said that Muslims were conquering the whole swaths of the Roman Empire, we have actually undone that. We've undone that conquest. And here's how we've done it. About 500 years ago, a German historian came up with the concept of the Byzantine Empire. The original name of Constantinople was Byzantion. When the Romans got there, they turned Byzantion into Byzantium. And so that's where we get the term Byzantine Empire, as in from Byzant, or in this case, Byzantium. Constantinople had been called Constantinople for centuries by the time the Roman Empire collapsed in 1453, and it was about 100 years later that this German historian came up with the term Byzantium. The Roman Empire, he's told us, died on September 4th, 476 AD. He gave us a very precise date. He said, this is when the Roman Empire died. So then when the Roman Empire was conquered by the Ottoman Empire on May 29th, 1453, it wasn't the Roman Empire that the Ottoman Empire conquered. It was the Byzantine Empire. Something that never existed. At the moment that the Roman Empire is surrendering on May 29, 1453, it called itself the Roman Empire. In other words, the Roman Empire collapsed, and then years later, it gets renamed. Well, just its last 1,000 years of existence. It would be like if the United States changed its capital from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco, right? Because that's what the Romans did. They moved their capital to Constantinople. And then, 1,000 years from now, historians come back. Let's say we change our capital to San Francisco next year. Trump decides to do it. We move the capital to San Francisco. And in 1,000 years from now, a historian comes back and renames the United States from that moment that our capital's in San Francisco on. And he calls the United States the Republic of Yerba Buena, which you all love. Yeah, sorry, it's just mint. It's mint. Everybody loves mint. That was the original name of San Francisco. So I came up with that. For those of you who are wondering what I was really implying. Well, right? San Francisco was called Yerba Buena at the time that the United States invaded it and conquered it, and then went, this is a terrible name. Good mint? Or good herb? Who would call a city that? And then flipped the name to San Francisco because it sounded cooler. I have to admit, I kind of agree. But do you see what I mean? Like, it's weird. Like, wow, you're going back and resurrecting this old name? We don't use it anymore. And you're calling the whole republic after that weird name that doesn't get used anymore? Where did this come from? And here's where it came from. I told you it was a German who came up with this. In 476 AD, there was a German named Odo Wacker. Isn't that a cool name? Odo Wacker. And Odo Wacker had decided that he was going to take over Italy. That's tough for the Roman Empire, though, because Italy was like the symbolic core of the Roman Empire. For all intents and purposes, the Roman Empire's capital was in Constantinople. It did have a secondary capital in Ravenna, and it had two emperors. There was the emperor in the east and the emperor in the west. The emperor in the east was Emperor Zeno, and the emperor in the west was this guy named Romulus Augustus. And Odo Wacker takes his armies up and down Italy, conquers it, captures Odo Wacker, forces the Roman Senate of the West, because there were two senates too, two emperors, two senates, forces the Roman Imperial Senate to form up, and then he gets up in front of them on April 4, 476, and he goes, I am creating the kingdom of Italy. I am the new king. He didn't say, and I'm taking it out of the Roman Empire. No, Italy will remain as part of the Roman Empire. I'm just the new king. I'm just the German king of the kingdom of Italy, which is still in the Roman Empire. But now there's no need to have a Western Roman emperor. So he tells Romulus Augustus, who I think was like 16, take off your robe. He had a purple robe. He takes it off. The Senate agrees to this. They vote for this to happen. They take off the robe. They stick it in a box. They call FedEx. FedEx comes and picks up the box, and they deliver it to Constantinople with a note saying, they probably emailed it, saying, we don't need two emperors. Emperor Zeno is enough. Romulus Augustus is abdicating. In effect, what happened on September 4, 476, is the Roman Empire sort of reunified. It switched back to having one capital, one emperor. It still had two senates. The Western Roman Senate died somewhere in the early 600s. We're not exactly sure what year. It died with such a whimper, we don't know. It didn't even vote to dissolve itself. It just sort of dissolved and never came back. Emperor Heraclius was emperor when it went away. That's all we know. Government shut down. They ran out of money, and they stopped meeting. They stopped doing their job. So they raised the debt ceiling. Or changed the calendar to accommodate the fact that they weren't allowed to have debt, so that they could have a year with 10 months in it and forever ruin my understanding of the names of the months, right? Just so irritating. Oct is 8. October should be the 8th month. And there it is, the 10th month. Really? Really?
Hey, Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. Now, I don't know if you've heard, but Mint's premium wireless is $15 a month. But I'd like to offer one other perk. We have no stores. That means no small talk. crazy weather we're having. No, it's not. It's just weather. Did you watch the big game? I haven't watched anything in 7 years because I have 4 children. Just sign up online at mintmobile.com. It is an introvert's dream.
Anyway, why is this important? Okay, great question. So this German is rewriting history to make it so that the Roman Empire doesn't die at the hands of the Ottoman Empire, a Muslim empire. It's the Byzantine Empire that dies at the hands of the Ottoman Empire. And instead, the Germans destroy the Roman Empire. And the reason he wants this to happen is there's an institution called the Holy Roman Empire. Now, when Napoleon Bonaparte destroyed the Holy Roman Empire in 1806, he declared the Holy Roman Empire as neither Holy, Roman, nor an empire. And by the way, I agree. It was definitely not holy. It was very much not Roman, although it did have parts of Italy. And it wasn't an empire at all. It was a confederacy. It was a confederacy of German and Italian states, mostly city-states. They were sort of clumped together. The kings in the Holy Roman Empire with the electors would elect an emperor. And the emperor did have some sway. He did have some control over things. But not in the way that you would think of an emperor. Like, we're not talking Star Wars emperor here. We're not even talking like Emperor Theodosius emperor. What we're really talking about is like President of the Confederate States of America. Right? There's 11 states, and we're not really sure how closely linked they are. And the guy doesn't really actually do much except get statues erected to him in 1965. And counties named after him, sometimes forts. So this German wants the Holy Roman Empire, which is this German confederacy, to have legitimacy. If the Germans destroyed the Roman Empire, then it's the Germans who are the heirs to the Roman Empire. So then the name Holy Roman Empire has some meaning. But then to make things more interesting, the Ottomans had as their specified goal to create a new Roman Empire. Their goal was to create a Muslim Roman Empire. Their goal was to replace the old, decrepit, corrupt, dying Christian Roman Empire with a new, vibrant Muslim Roman Empire. That's why they wanted Constantinople so badly. Because once they had the capital of the Roman Empire, that would not only become their capital, and it would become a splendid capital, but it would also be an enormous symbolic gesture. We have Rome. It's done. We've done it. We've made this Muslim Roman Empire. So to delegitimize the Ottoman Empire, it became useful to have, oh no, you thought you conquered Rome? You didn't. You conquered the Byzantine Empire. We Germans, we took out Rome 1,000 years ago. Sorry, you missed it. Right? We were literally in the act of rewriting history to mean something it didn't mean, to be something it wasn't, for ideological reasons, to create this East-West divide. This East-West divide that is so weird. Catch this. Crescent moon and star is the symbol of the Ottomans, for sure. Who else? The Pakistani flag has it, but why does the Pakistani flag have it? It's the symbol of Islam. It's also the symbol of the city of Constantinople, the last capital of the Roman Empire. When the Muslims took that as their holy symbol, the crescent moon and the star, it had been the symbol, it had been the banner for the capital of the Roman Empire. In other words, the Muslims weren't creating something new. They were taking something that existed and went, that's cool, we'll take that for ourselves. If you look at the original coins that the Muslims minted, they have an emperor standing with a cross in one hand and a globus cruciger. A globus cruciger is a globe with a cross sticking out of it. The original Muslim coins had 2 crosses on it. And the Muslims didn't see any contradiction in the fact that they were minting Roman coins. They didn't have any Arabic script on them anywhere. The civilization that the Muslims created had indoor plumbing. Sewage water was pumped out. They created a coffee industry, a sugar industry. They resurrected ice cream. It had existed in some shape or form, went out of existence. The Arabs brought it back. It wasn't really ice cream, it was sherbet. It was ice with fruit juice. In fact, that's where we get the word sherbet from. It's from sharbat, which is just juice in Arabic. Right? Coffee comes from the Arabic word gahwa. Sukkar comes originally from a Hindi word, but through Arabic, which is just sugar, sukkar. Sifr, zero, comes from Arabic. Algebra, algorithm, admiral, apricot. All of those are Arabic words that were brought in. Zenith, nadir. Right? All brought in to our language and enriched our language in the process. So I'm going to go back a little bit, though. I want to talk about one other weird thing in this story. So the Vikings. So just disclaimer, I am a quarter Scandinavian. So when I talk about the Vikings, like enormous chunks of pride come welling up. And if I sound gross, it's because I am. Right, just for the record. I can't help it. Who here doesn't like the Vikings? Nobody raised their hand. Okay, so some of you are dishonest. Oh, okay, there. That's good, thanks. Really appreciate it. They were really mean. So the Vikings go on this tear. Now, the tear that they go on is shockingly similar to what the Arabs do, except that the Arabs do it suddenly and they end up conquering a huge empire in the process. What the Vikings do takes about 3 centuries, so it's not very sudden. And the Vikings had a little bit of a cruel edge to them, just for the record, whereas the Arabs just didn't. They weren't so into the cruelty thing. But they had one thing really in common, and that was that they thought of their homeland as merely a starting point. That it was sacred. There was some religious value to it. But from an economic standpoint, from a political standpoint, it wasn't very useful. And the reason is, think about it. What is today Saudi Arabia is the starting point for the Arabs. There are no rivers. Like right there, oh my God, crappy piece of real estate. How do you function with no rivers? Where do you get your water? How do you do agriculture? Like, oh my God, you wouldn't even know the name Saudi Arabia if it wasn't for oil, because the place is basically uninhabitable. And the Arabs kind of saw it that way. They were like, oh God, here I go, another day in river-free land. The Vikings saw Scandinavia the same way. They saw it as a chunk of land that you could get trees from, you could go fishing from, you could raise dairy cows in parts of it, but you couldn't farm it. It's just too cold. And as a result, it was actually really crappy land. So one of the goals, really it's one of 2 goals, that the Vikings had when they began leaving Scandinavia and attacking places like Scotland and Ireland and England and Germany and France and Poland and Spain and Italy and Russia and Lithuania and Estonia and Latvia and Finland. Their goal was to get some agricultural land, to just be able to get out there and work the soil and plant some plants and eat some vegetables, because they were really sick of fish, beef, and cheese wheels. The other thing that the Vikings were really interested in was trade. They really thought, unlike today in the United States, that trade was the pathway to wealth. Right? That your ability to interact with other countries in a peaceful manner where you would exchange goods would generate huge amounts of wealth. Now, one of the reasons why the Vikings turned so violent was they were having a hard time trading with the rest of Europe, because Europe was, 1,200 years ago, extremely poor. By extremely poor, I mean Charlemagne didn't have any gold, so he had to mint all his coins in silver. Like, Europe just didn't have any resources. Paris was a city of 10,000 people, right? Like, UT is 5 times bigger. The Vikings turned a little vicious on their neighbors, not just to grab their land, but also to steal goods worth selling. And one of the reasons they did this was they wanted to be able to trade with homeland. According to the Viking sagas, the Vikings were originally from Persia, and they wanted to go back to Persia and trade with them. But by the time they're getting back to Persia in the 800s, Persia has already been conquered by Muslims. So they're actually arriving in Muslim Persia. And those Muslims not only had street lamps lit up by oil, and not only did they have silk and linen and cotton, but they were experimenting with modern technology like modern medicine and modern agriculture and private property ownership and different ways of doing metal. For example, what the Arabs had realized was that the Indians knew how to make steel, not iron, steel. And so the Arabs would go to India, they'd buy steel ingots from India, and they'd bring it back and they'd make steel tools, steel swords, steel armor. And that gave them an edge on everything. And the Vikings were like, oh my God, we need a piece of this. How do we get into this? And interestingly enough, they began enslaving Northern Europe and taking those slave populations and selling them into the Persian Empire in exchange for this technology and these goods. But then something remarkable happens, and that is they start to succeed in actually conquering chunks of land. They conquer part of northern France. They will conquer England twice. They do it, lose it, and get it back. Right? The first time they capture it is under Canute the Great, and then the second time they capture it is under William the Conqueror. But one of the things that happens to the Vikings as they're conquering, by the way, they invented Russia. The Vikings invented Russia. The word Russia is a Viking word. It's from Rus, R-U-S. And what had happened was the Rus were a Viking tribe that had gotten hired by what are today Ukrainian lords to create order in the area. The Rus show up, they beat everybody up, they create order, right? And then they realize, why are we submitting to these Ukrainians? We're taking over. And the next thing you know, the Rus are ruling Ukraine, the original Russia, and before you know it, they create Russia. And now today, Ukraine wants nothing to do with Russia. The irony is too weird. A group of these Vikings end up in Barabos, which you know today is Saragossa. It's in Spain. It's on the Ebro River. It's in northern Spain. And the Vikings took it from the Arabs. When the Vikings conquered northern France, they dumped their Viking languages and switched over to French. When the Vikings did the Rus thing, they dumped